Hey friends, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing my May wrap up. And in the month of May, I was able to read 20 books. I had a really great reading month in the month of May. I read 14 novels and then I read 6 either like manga or graphic novels. I was just really in a reading mood in the month of May. Like, I don't know, something just came over me where I was just wanting to read a book every single day. Like, it doesn't always happen. But in the month of May, I was definitely in such a reading mood all month long. On top of the 20 books that I did actually end up finishing reading, I also had a number of DNFs throughout the month. I did DNF Circe? I got about 70 pages into this one before I decided to DNF. I was reading this book for the Backlist Bonanza vlog that I was working on this month, and I don't think Greek mythology is my thing personally. I also ended up DNFing The Perfect Guy Doesn't Exist. I only got like 10 pages into this one, so I might return to this one at some point. And then I also DNF'd both Unsteady and Late Bloomer. I got pretty deep into both of these. I mean, I got 174 pages into Unsteady before I DNF'd, and then with Late Bloomer, I got 75 pages in. I also did end up DNFing A Murder in the Family, and this is one that I also got like, I want to say like I got 150 pages into this one. And for me, the style of this book I couldn't get into it. It was so mixed media to the point where I just couldn't get invested in the story. And speaking of mixed media, I did work on a number of different reading vlogs throughout the month. One of the vlogs that I did was reading thrillers that involve mixed media. I also did another round of the Backlist Bonanza, as I mentioned, which is an episode series that I do on this channel where a spin the wheel picks books from my backlist for me to read. Then I also did a reading vlog this month, which is one of my favorite vlogs I think that I've ever made on this channel, and it was a vlog where a random number generator, or like a spin the wheel, chooses how many hours I have to read every single day for a whole week. Over on my Patreon this month, I actually decided to do a dedicated reading vlog to The Women by Kristen Hanna, and so I did a whole reading vlog for this over on my Patreon this month, which includes all the spoilers and like all of my feelings for this book. And this book, I will say, I was kind of surprised by how I ended up feeling about this, so more thoughts on that to come. And then before jumping right into the wrap up, I just wanted to let you know about my Trova trip, which is coming up in Italy this October. I just wanted to let you know that currently on my trip right now, I only have 11 spots left, and I would love to have you join us. If you're thinking about joining us, now would be the time to book. Right now, if you go to book the Italy trip, you can still put 25% of the cost of the trip down just to reserve your spot. I just know that this trip to Italy is going to be such a dream come true. It's going to be so much fun to travel with a bunch of bookish friends. All of the people who have signed up for this trip so far are just the most lovely people to talk to. I've never been to Italy before, and this is actually going to be my second international trip that I've ever taken. And so I know from my experience with traveling with Trova Trip last year that, you know, they really just take care of you with everything, and you don't have to worry about anything while you're on these trips. You know, we get a tour guide that's with us the entire time, and they speak the language, so you don't have to worry about any language barrier problems. I'll have the link down below that'll have the full itinerary and all of the information if you want to think about joining us. But anyways, let's jump into the wrap up. So starting with some of the manga that I read this month, I did end up reading Spy Family Volume 11, and this is the most recent volume that just came out. And you know, I love Spy Family. Like, it's no secret that I absolutely adore this series, and I think if you're looking to get into manga, I think Spy Family would be the perfect thing to start with because it's so like wholesome, but it's also so like action-packed and so much fun. And this volume 11, is actually one of my favorites in the whole series. Like, I gave this one 5 stars. I loved it so much. It was so action-packed, and it involved a lot of like my favorite character, Anya, in the story. Like, it was so cute. I just loved it so much. I also ended up reading Stitches, which this is by Junji Ito, but then it's also by another author because Junji Ito did like the illustrations in this, but then there's also like a lot of text. Like, it feels like you're reading just more of like a fictional story, and so it's not so much manga. And this one ended up being okay for me. I actually gave this one 2 stars because this was a collection of a bunch of different short stories, and unfortunately for me, like, none of them were very memorable or very scary. I just expected so much more from this. I also ended up reading Happiness Volumes 2, 3, and 4. This is a series that I'm currently obsessed with, and it's a series that's kind of like a horror series that involves vampires. It's from the same author as Blood on the Tracks, which is like one of my favorite manga series of all time. I think I gave Volume 2 4 stars, and then Volume 3 was about a 3 star. I think the 3rd volume was okay, but then the 4th volume, I really enjoyed this 4th volume. I think I also gave this one 4 stars, but this one's definitely one of my favorite in the series so far because Volume 4 is where like shit is really starting to hit the fan, and it was so action-packed and so interesting. And then the last manga that I read was Cherry Magic Volume 1, and this is the cutest like male romance manga series. They live in this world where when you turn 30 and you're still a virgin, you get like magical wizard abilities. And so we follow this guy who's like our main protagonist, and when he turns 30 and he's still a virgin, he gets the ability to like read people's minds essentially. And then it's so cute because he discovers and finds out that one of like the cutest guys in his office, like every time he goes near him, he realizes that he has feelings for him because he could read his mind. And it is literally so freaking cute. Oh my god, I loved this so much. I gave this first volume 4 4 stars, and I cannot wait to continue in this series because like the concept is so like silly, but it's so cute. It's so genuinely cute, and they have such cute chemistry. And jumping into the books that I read this month, the first thing that I picked up was True Crime Story by Joseph Knox, and this is a thriller that I read for the reading vlog that I did this month that was reading thrillers with mixed media elements, because this entire story is told in interviews and like emails and different articles. It's about this girl named Zoe Nolan who went missing. It says she walked out of a party in the apartment where she'd been living for 3 months. She was 19 and she was a student at Manchester University, and then she was never seen again. And so in this story, what's really interesting is that we're following from the perspective of this writer named Evelyn Mitchell, and she's gonna be the one like interviewing all of Zoe's friends, kind of trying to figure out like what happened leading up to the night where she went missing. And what's really like confusing and weird about this book for me is that Joseph Knox, like the writer of this fictional book, is also like involved in the story in a way. So he's the one emailing Evelyn Mitchell about like her ideas for like making this a true crime series, and they kind of like talk about like the different things, and then he's also like involved in the story in a very weird specific way. And I just thought that was so interesting. I don't know how I feel about like authors inserting themselves into like fictional stories. I feel like it makes it kind of like confusing and weird, but overall I really did like this one. I really loved the audiobook, and I would highly recommend the audiobook because the audiobook is so cool. It's a full cast audiobook, but then they also put so much attention into the details of like the sound effects and like the staticky phone call sounds, and like all of it was just so cool. There was like typewriter sounds during the emailing scenes. Like it was just so well done and so interesting. I feel like this story really kept me engaged throughout most of the book, but then towards the end it just started to drop off and I started to lose interest a little bit in the second half. And I also, okay, for me personally, I found the ending of this to be so underwhelming, and I just didn't really care for the ending. So I think overall I'm giving this one like between like a 3 and a 3.5 stars. And then the next thriller that I read for that video is The Heiress by Rachel Hawkins, and I didn't realize at the time that this one has mixed media elements as well. I've read almost all of the thrillers that Rachel Hawkins has come out with, and I think this one could be my favorite. I don't know. I think the thing that I liked so much about this one is that we're following the story of this character named Ruby, who like she's giving such like Evelyn Hugo vibes to me. Like I feel like this book kind of reads like Evelyn Hugo, but like with murder, because she was known to have all these different husbands. I think she had like 4 different husbands, and they all kind of died under like suspicious circumstances. So it's almost like she's been accused of like murdering her 4 different husbands. It's very like Evelyn Hugo to me in that way, and I loved that about this. The main story that we're following is from the perspective of her adopted son Camden, and it's like a few years after she's died, but he's going back to like the estate where like the whole family lives. This one also just has the best atmosphere of like the southern gothic kind of feel to it. The house is called Ashby House, and the characters Camden and then his wife Jules are going back to Ashby House, and so they're like confronting all of these secrets from the past, trying to figure out the truth. There's also this like mystery about what happened to Ruby when she was a little girl. So there's a lot of different mysteries that you're trying to figure out in this book, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was so much fun. I really liked the pacing of this book. I loved the atmosphere and like the South and the gothic vibes. It was just really great. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Like I do think it could be my favorite Rachel Hawkins so far. Like I don't know, I'd have to think about it more, but I really had a good time with this one. The next thing that I read was the first book that I read for the Backlist Bonanza episode, and that was The Daydreams. And this is one that I was really excited about because I heard a lot of people compare this to like Daisy Jones and the Six kind of vibes. And in this story, we're following a group of people who were all stars on this really popular teen show that came out in the early 2000s. Yeah, and now we're following them during their reunion special that's taking place 13 years later. So the timeline of this story kind of jumps around all over the place because we do get flashbacks to like the time where these people were actually starring on the show, and then we also get the flashbacks 13 years later where they're getting together for the reunion. And this book was just not as entertaining or juicy as I wanted it to be. Like it really wasn't. It was so boring. And like I know I said this in my vlog when I talked about this book, but I really feel like it was such a mistake to have this story be told from Kat's perspective, because I really feel like this story feels like it's about the character Summer and like her story, and so I really would have preferred for the book to be told from her point of view. And I don't know, I thought the ending was just so cheesy and it just didn't really go in the direction that I was hoping it would, so I ended up giving this one 2 stars. And then I also, for that video, I ended up reading Untamed Shore by Sylvia Morena Garcia, and this is one that is kind of like a historical fiction that kind of has like a mystery thriller feel to it, but it's definitely like like a slow burn, and this is one of those books that it's more about the atmosphere and the characters than it is about the plot, I guess. I mean, in this story, we're following this young girl who is living in Baja, California in 1979, and apparently Baja, California is a place in Mexico. Like, I didn't know that. I didn't know there's a place called California in Mexico. Like, I had no idea. And so she's just, you know, living her life. It's 1979, you know, so we're taking place in the 70s here. And then these Americans, like these travelers come and they're in the town, and she kind of gets caught up in like the lies and the secrets of these Americans, and then somebody dies. And then it's just kind of a story about how she's getting involved in this like case of like one of the people died, so now she's getting put under suspicion. And for me, I don't know, this book was interesting in the way that like I really liked the setting in this. I liked that this book mostly took place on the beach, and it was very atmospheric in its setting with like the idea of like the sharks in the local town, and you know, the small town vibes in this were also very strong. And I actually really did like our protagonist, like our lead female character. I really liked her. I really connected with her. Like once she gets involved with like the Americans, and there's like this kind of romantic storyline happening, and I just started to lose interest in this very quickly. And as far as like where the story went, like I could not care less about what was happening in the storyline. Like the plot just did not interest me, which sucked because I really did like the characters in this, and I liked the setting. So this one I gave 2.5 stars. And then the next book that I read for that reading vlog was The Bell Chime, which this one is a horror novella that I was so excited for because I've been hearing some good things about this one, and I thought the premise was one of the most creepy things that I'd ever heard in my freaking life. We're basically following this girl who, you know, she's kind of having these paralyzing night terrors from time to time, and she finds this missing persons poster that has her face on it. But what's creepy about it is that the photo of her that's on the missing poster, like she's never seen that photo of her before, and she has like the most creepy, like unsettling kind of like smile on her face, and she's like, what the heck, like that's so creepy, I don't remember ever taking this picture. And then what's weird is that when she pulls down like the missing poster, the fucking eyes like follow her on the page. Like how creepy is that? Oh my god. The setup for this book was absolutely everything. Like I thought this could be a new favorite because I was already getting so freaked out. Like in the beginning, in the first like 40 to 50 pages, I was like, oh my god, this is reminding me of so many different horror things that I love. Oh my gosh, this story just takes like the weirdest turn after like 50 pages in, and it becomes so ridiculous and like cliche and just like stupid in my opinion. Like I just did not like the direction of where the story ended up going. It was so weird too because we had a very abrupt like point of view change that just felt so unnecessary, and then I like did not give a single shit about anything else that was happening in this, and the ending just felt so silly and like ridiculous. Like I don't know, I just did not like the tone of this book towards the end. Like it completely just changed everything that I was loving about it. Freaking frustrating because I feel like a book like this, it had so much freaking potential, and then it just like wasted it. Like I literally almost DNF'd this book even though it's only about like 140 pages. Like it's a short book, but like it got so incredibly boring after the 50 page mark, and it just sucks. So I ended up giving this 1 star. And then the next book that I read was this one called My Husband. I actually listened to this one entirely on audio, and I'd been hearing about this book from a few of my friends. Like I know my friends Lexi and Jan recently read this and really loved it, so I was so curious about it. And this one is so fascinating. Like I don't even know how to pitch this book to you because some people I think are considering this to be like a mystery thriller, and I would say that's not really the vibe with this. I think this is definitely one of those kind of like really weird, odd literary fiction books that you feel like you just get put into the head of this character who's like really unhinged. Honestly, like it kind of reminded me a little bit of like Big Swiss. Like it had that kind of vibe to it where it's like it's not exactly a mystery thriller, but it kind of does have a similar tone, but like you're really just getting put into the head of this woman who's kind of obsessive and unhinged. But it's so entertaining. Like it is literally so entertaining. And in this story, we're following this woman who is just like kind of obsessed with her husband. I think this book is really interesting the way that it talks about marriage and kind of like dissects the idea of marriage and like the expectations people have. And I guess I feel the same way about this book as I do with Big Swiss, where like it's one of those books that's like it doesn't make sense. Like I don't know how to pitch it to people because it's such a weird story. Like it's really weird, it's really odd. There's no plot happening. You're just following in the head of a character who's like kind of obsessive and unhinged. And it just has some kind of like addictive quality to the writing where like I just can't put it down. Like I listened to this entire audiobook in 2 sittings because I was just so addicted to listening to it. Like there was something about it. So I absolutely loved this. I loved the writing style so much. I gave this 4.5 stars, but honestly, like might bump it up to 5 stars. Like I loved this. It was so unique. It was so good. It was just so well written. You know, like I really wish that I bought a copy of this book so that I could annotate the hell out of it, because I feel like it's just one of those books where you could annotate and underline and highlight so many things because the writing is just so fucking beautiful. And then the next book that I read this month was Here We Go Again. I'm so glad that I finally read this because I had an arc of this and I've just had it sitting on my shelf staring at me. And this is one that I was really, really excited for because I'm a huge fan of this author. Like, this is the same author as The Charm Offensive and Kiss Her Once for Me, which are two of my favorite romance books of all time. Like, they were both in my like top 5 of the year that I read them, I'm pretty sure. So like, it's safe to say that I went into this with some pretty high expectations. This one is a female-female romance. We're following these two characters named Logan and Rosemary, and they were kind of like really close childhood best friends, but then like there was an incident where they stopped talking to each other, and now it's like 10 years later after high school, and they're both in their 30s and they're both teachers, and they find out that their English teacher, who they were both very close to, is going to be dying soon. Like, he finds out that he's going to be dying soon, and so Joe, like this teacher guy, he calls them up and he's like, I really want to die in Maine. And, you know, they live in the Pacific Northwest. So he requests that they go on this road trip all together, like all 3 of them, and they travel from Washington all the way to Maine. And so this book, I was a little hesitant going into this because, you know, I don't typically care for like second chance kind of romances or like childhood friends to lovers, or like road trips are like never really my favorite thing to read about in books. So I kind of did go into this with some hesitations because I just thought, oh, well, maybe this book won't be for me. But because I love this author so fucking much, I still went into this with some high hopes. And unfortunately, I feel like I'm the only fucking person who feels this way, but this one ended up being like a 3-star for me. Like, it was fine. I do like the idea of them like, you know, rejoining forces and then, you know, helping their old English teacher that they both adore. Joe, oh my god, his character, like the teacher Joe, he is definitely, without a doubt, the best character in this book. Like, he is incredible, iconic. I loved him so much. Like, he was so beautiful. And like, his storyline throughout this book was the thing that kept me the most intrigued in this story. Like, I loved his character. There were definitely some moments at the end where I got a little misty-eyed, you know, I got a little teary-eyed because it's beautiful. It's one of those books that is meant to be a gut punch. Like, this is a heavy, heavy read. But at the same time, it was really like Logan's character. For me, she just drove me fucking nuts. Like, she literally read like a 13-year-old boy. I'm sorry, but she has the personality of a 13-year-old boy. Like, she was obnoxious most of the time. The miscommunication trope can only be used so much. I mean, the miscommunication was like off the fucking charts with these two, and it was just driving me nuts. I also just think like the road trip elements were fun, but it was also like a lot of bickering. Bickering just kind of started to feel repetitive to me. Like, I don't know, they both started to drive me a little bit nuts. I just didn't really connect with their characters as much as I wanted to. Like, I definitely connected with Joe's character a lot more. Like, he was the one that was like making me emotional throughout this book, whereas like Logan and Rosemary, like, they were cute at times, but then they also were just driving me fucking crazy. So like, I'm sad that this was only a 3-star for me. I wish that I had loved this more, but you know, it is what it is. And then the next few books that I read this month were all books that I read for the reading vlog, where a random number generator chose how many hours I read every day for a week. And the first book that I read for that video was The Gathering by CJ Tudor. And this is one that I was really excited about because, you know, CJ Tudor has been a little bit of a hit or miss author for me in the past, because I have loved so many books from CJ Tudor, but then last year, The Drift, I gave that 1 star. Like, I was not a huge fan of The Drift. So I went into this with a little bit of like, you know, hesitation. But this one, the premise is just so fascinating because we're following this character who's a detective, and she's gonna be investigating this crime in Alaska. It takes place in a small town in Alaska, but what's interesting about this small town in Alaska is that they have vampires there, and like in this world that this book takes place in, they have vampires who are like coexisting with humans, and they just try to make it work. But she specifically, our main character Barbara, she's a specialist in vampire killings, so she's like called out to certain cases, and she's there to try and figure out if the death was caused by a vampire or if it was like a human. I really loved so many things about this book. I mean, the number one thing that I loved was the freaking atmosphere. Oh my god, like the snowy small town Alaska vibes with vampires. Oh my god, it was giving. It was the perfect book atmosphere. I loved everything about that. I also just loved the discussion of like how these vampires were like coexisting with the humans and like how all of that worked. It was like very interesting to read about. Then my issues with this book were that, okay, one, there were way too many characters. Like, oh my god, it was so confusing because like you get to know almost every single person that's living in this small town in Alaska, and like by the time some of the reveals are happening later on in the book, I kept being like, wait, who the fuck is that? Like, you have to go back through your notes and be like, who even is that? So I don't love in a book like that where there's just too many characters for me to enjoy the story. And then I also think, you know, I have the same problem with this book that I tend to have with most detective based like fiction books. I just don't love reading from a detective's point of view in my thrillers. I don't know why, I just feel like a detective point of view, it reads like so clinical and so like dry and so boring. And I kind of felt that way about this one. Like, even though it had the cool element of the vampires, it still does read like detective fiction to me, which just isn't my favorite writing. But overall, I did think this book was really interesting and it had a lot of potential. I think I'm giving this one 3 stars. And then the next book that I read was The Unraveling by Vi Keeland. And this one's actually an ARC copy that I have. This one goes on sale July 9th. And this is one I was really excited to read because if you didn't know, Vi Keeland, she's actually primarily a romance author, and I've read a few romance books from her in the past and I've really enjoyed them. And so as far as I know, this is like the first kind of like thriller-ish book that she's come out with. So I was like very excited to check this out. And this one definitely does feel more like a romantic kind of thriller. Like there are some romance elements in this story as well. This story was so fascinating. Oh my God, you know, every now and then when you just need a juicy, interesting thriller that has some romance in it that you can just fly through in like 2 sittings, yeah, that's this book. And in this story, we're following this character named Meredith, and she is a therapist, and she's been going through a really hard thing recently, like a really hard grief thing that's happened to her. I don't know if it says in the premise like what exactly happened to her, but she's dealing with some grief. And then one day this patient named Gabriel, he rolls in and he's gonna be her new patient for her like therapy. And it's awkward and it's unethical because she has a connection to this man through the tragedy that they've experienced, and she doesn't know if he knows that, but she like knows who he is. And then it's like she's continuing to provide therapy to this man even though she knows it's not right. And this story was just fascinating. I don't know, it was just fascinating. It was. It was a bunch of shitty characters doing things that were shitty and like yikes, and it was so messy, and there was romance in it, but it was so fascinating. It was so fast paced. Like this is just one of those books that it was so easy to fly through. It was less than 300 pages. Like I just had a great time with this. It was very entertaining. And I think if you're a fan typically of the thrillers like Taryn Fisher or like Geneva Rose or even Colleen Hoover, I think you might love this. Like, I don't know, I really enjoyed it. I had a fun time with it. I gave it 4 stars. I'm not always in the mood for like a romantic kind of thriller like this, but sometimes I guess I am, and I really enjoyed this one. And then the next book that I read this month is Diavola by Jennifer Thorne, and this one is actually my BookTube pick for the month of May. And if you saw my vlog, I'm so excited to let you know that this was actually a 5-star book for me. Like, let's fucking go. I just get so excited anytime a book is actually 5 stars for my own book club because it so rarely happens for me. And this is a new release horror book. This one was actually so much fun. It's about a family who's going to vacation in Italy. Like they're taking a trip to Italy, which honestly, like perfect timing for me to read something like this because, you know, as I mentioned, I'm gonna be going to Italy for the first time this October. So like that was really cool. It was really cool to see Italy through the lens of like a tourist in this book. And so we're following this character named Anna, and she's kind of like the black sheep in her family. Like her family is just so freaking toxic and they're so awful to her specifically, but she's there with her family and like she's the only one that speaks Italian, so she kind of like translates for them sometimes. And then this story is about how they think that their villa that they're staying in Italy is haunted, and there's all these rumors about this like lady who haunts the villa where they're staying, and like all the locals, anytime they say where they're staying, all the locals are like, ooh, like that's creepy, like do you know about her? And dude, the freaking atmosphere in this book was so good. It was so creepy. I love the whole idea of like, oh, she thinks she sees something standing behind her in the mirror in the bathroom, and then like she thinks that she hears scratching on the walls, or like her nieces that are there with her, like she thinks that she hears them whispering in Italian to each other, like they don't even know how to speak Italian. Like that is so creepy. And so like the creepy atmosphere in this book was absolutely 100 out of 100 doing it for me. Like I loved the atmosphere. I know I see a lot of people complaining with this one that the pacing is just really slow, and it's definitely like a slow burn, and I would agree, like it's a slow burn, and that's for sure, but I love that about this. Like I am here for the slow burn in horror as long as it's done well and it keeps me engaged and it's like a creepy setting. Like I love it. And so I personally really love this. It was 5 out of 5 for me. I think the ending is either gonna really work for some people or it's really not gonna work, but for me, I loved everything about the ending. I feel like it delivered on all of the things that I wanted to see happen in the end, and it also just got so unhinged and like ridiculous in a way that I wasn't expecting, but I was like here for it. I thought it was so fun. So yeah, this was a 5-star for me, and I'm really happy about it. I can't wait to talk about this in the BookTube live show, which will be coming up on June 2nd. I'll have the live show linked down below if you want to save the link, and I hope you can join us because I have so much to say about this one. All right, the next book that I read was The Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. And you know, Christina Lauren is an author that I used to love so fucking much in the past. Like their book, The Unhoneymooners, and Autobiography, and Josh and Hazel's Guide, like those are some of my favorite romance books of all time. But like in the last, like, I don't know, 5 to 6 years, like I haven't really been enjoying anything that Christina Lauren has been putting out. And so I kind of told myself, like, I don't really want to read more books from them unless the premise really intrigues me and like feels like it could be a perfect book for me. And so this premise was everything, which is why I decided to pick up this one. And so in this story, we're following this character named Anna, and then the guy's name is Liam West. And these two, they had actually been roommates and they were fake married for like a couple years before. And it was basically so like they could qualify for like certain housing while they were in school. But now it's been 3 years later and Anna doesn't know that they're still married. Like she thought that the divorce had like gone through or something, but Liam was like, no, the divorce never went through, and he needs her to come with him to Singapore because one of his siblings is getting married and they're having this huge family event, and like the family hasn't met her and like they need to know that he's actually married. And so he asks her to join him in Singapore for his sibling's wedding. You know, his family is incredibly rich because like they own this like popular grocery chain in America called the Westons or something like that. Yeah, this story, it mostly takes place in Singapore as they're, you know, like staying in the same hotel room together. They have to share the same bed, of course. And, you know, they're leading up to his sibling's wedding. And honestly, like this family in this story, like the rich family, the Westons, like they are just like the fucking worst. They really do remind me of like that family on Succession where like they're all just like obsessive and like it's like rich people problems, you know? And Anna, I mean, Anna's character, she really does feel like the heart and soul of this book. Like she's very funny and like her personality was just really great. And I thought that they had really great chemistry. But then there were also a lot of things about this book that were just like, ugh. Like the way she kept referring to his, as his goddamn. It got really annoying after a while. There were just certain things about her character that I think they were intended to be like quirky and like cute little character things that got really annoying after a while. And then the epilogue of this book, like why is the epilogue like over 20 pages long? Like I was ready for the book to end at that point. Like there were some things about the ending that I didn't necessarily care for. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars overall. Like I'm still really glad that I read this. I had a fun time with it. I loved the Singapore setting. I loved like the wedding vibes. I thought that was really fun. And I'm always here for like the fake dating or like the fake marriage trope because I just think that's so much fun. I love it. But there were just a few little nitpicky things that I had with this one, which is why I couldn't rate it higher than 4 stars. But this is definitely like my favorite Christina Lauren that I've read since The Honeymooners, I think. Like, and that says a lot because I really enjoyed this one. And then I also ended up reading The Kiss Countdown. This is another romance book. And this one's really fun because in this story, we're following this girl who is a struggling event planner. And then she ends up getting involved with this guy who's an astronaut, which is like the main reason why I wanted to read this because a freaking astronaut. Like I love that so much. It's really funny because this book involves the fake dating trope as well as the roommates to lovers trope, which are 2 of my favorite things of all time, which is why I wanted to read this book so badly. And so in this story, we're following our protagonist when she's like in a coffee shop and she ends up seeing her ex and like his new girl like in the coffee shop. And she had run into this guy Vincent at the same coffee shop like about a week earlier, and she had accidentally like bumped into him and like spilled her coffee all over him, and it was kind of like a brief like oops. And then Vincent ends up walking into the coffee shop as she's talking to her ex-boyfriend, and the ex-boyfriend's like, so you don't have anybody in your life? Like, oh my god. And she's like, actually I do. And she just like grabs Vincent and she's like, this is my boyfriend or whatever. And so Vincent just kind of like goes along with it, and then it kind of turns into like a fake dating thing where he's like, you know, I could actually use a fake girlfriend to like go to my sister's party or whatever. But my issue with this book is that I feel like, for me personally, I feel like they had better chemistry before they actually got together. Because like once they got together, or once they started getting together, which also kind of happened too soon for my personal taste, once they got together, it was like the chemistry just wasn't there anymore. I feel like they had better chemistry with each other before they got together, and then after they got together, it just got so boring. And I just also think the second half of this book, it started to drag for me, and like the third act conflict, you know, because every romance has like the third act conflict, and it just felt a little bit ridiculous to me. Like I just didn't care for the third act conflict in this book either. So I ended up giving this one 3 stars. I thought it was still cute and it was a good time, but it's like not a new favorite, not very memorable for me. And then I ended up reading The Women by Kristen Hanna, which, as I mentioned, this is a book that I did an entire Patreon exclusive reading vlog dedicated to this book this month. And this book was quite an experience because, you know, Kristen Hanna is an author that I really love. Like I would consider her to be a favorite author of mine. I don't typically read historical fiction, like it's not my genre, but some of her books that she's written, like The Nightingale and The Four Winds and The Great Alone, like those are all some of my favorite books of all time. And so if anybody's gonna make me read historical fiction and care, I know that it's Kristen Hanna. But I knew like this book was gonna be hard for me to read because in this story, we're following this character named Frankie, and she was actually gonna be working as a nurse in the army in the Vietnam War. And so this book I knew was gonna be difficult for me to read because I don't typically like reading historical fiction that's centered around war. I just find it really difficult for me to get into. And I feel like for me, I feel like a lot of war stories really read the same, and I kind of did feel that about this book, with the only exception being that she was a woman. It's hard for me to talk about this story in any like negative way because I do respect and I love what this book stands for and the message that it has, because like I didn't know about the Vietnam War, that so many people just like assumed that like no women were in the Vietnam War, or like anytime she would talk about the war, they'd be like, what do you mean? Like no women were there. And that this was like an actual widespread belief. Like people just didn't know that women were in the Vietnam War. And the way that like the people who served in Vietnam were treated when they came back home, like I remember reading about that in history and just thinking it was so freaking awful. And like the shame that even her own family has around her serving in the war, it was just really, really sad. And I feel like this book almost kind of reads just like tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. Like it was just really hard to read. It was a lot. I feel like there was a lot of scenes that took place in Vietnam when she's working as a nurse where like there was just so many scenes that were brutal to read. It was like, you know, gory amputations and just like all the different things that she was seeing that were so traumatic. And I do struggle to rate this one because I do appreciate this story and what this book stands for, and like knowing that this book was inspired by true events and like real life women who did serve in Vietnam. I just respect the hell out of everything that this book stands for, and I appreciate Kristen Hanna for touching on this subject and like writing the stories that matter. I also think my enjoyment of this book was very low for a number of different reasons. I mean, I personally feel like Frankie as a character, I don't know why, I really struggled to connect with her character in this, and I feel like she didn't have that much more to her character other than being a nurse and like talking about the war. Like there was just nothing more to her. I also think some of the romances that were happening in this book were just a little messy. Like I did not like any of the romances that were happening in this book. I was very frustrated with a lot of the choices that Frankie was making as a protagonist. Like I did not agree with her, and I was just kind of frustrated. Like I couldn't get on board with the romance scenes. There were definitely some scenes in the second half that I started to enjoy a lot more, but then also like there were things about the very ending of this book that also frustrated me, and I felt like you really just had to like suspend your disbelief on certain things. And so like I don't know, I have very mixed feelings on this one. I didn't connect with it nearly as much as I was hoping to, and so I ended up giving this one like a 3.5 stars. I mean, I really do go into like a lot more in-depth thoughts, so if you want to see all of my spoilery thoughts for this one, I will have that vlog linked down below. But I am sad that this wasn't like a new 5-star favorite. And then the last book that I read this month that was such a surprise is Savor It. And this one is a romance novel, and the thing that really intrigued me about this, like the reason I was excited for this, is because on the back here there's a blurb that says this is Schitt's Creek meets The Bear, and I was like, wait, what? Because those are two of my favorite shows ever, and I feel like this actually really does deliver on those vibes, because in this story we're following this character named Sage, and she lives in this really small town in Oregon, so like it takes place in the Pacific Northwest. Like I love the vibes. And then we also follow this guy named Fisher, and he is this very well-known, very successful chef that was from New York City, and he's gonna be moving out to Oregon for the summer. And then he's also gonna be taking care of his niece because his sister has recently passed away, and so he's taking guardianship of his niece, and they're gonna be moving to Oregon together. And so, you know, it definitely has the vibe of like, it kind of reminds me of The Bear just because he's a chef. Like he was definitely giving like Jeremy Allen White vibes, but then also like the relationship that he had with his niece is like the cutest thing I've ever seen in my freaking life. And so he moves to town and they become kind of like next door neighbors, and Sage is dealing with the fact that her ex-boyfriend Ian is like showing off his new romance with this girl, and she kind of wants like a win for herself. And like the small town where she lives, they have this thing called the Festival of Spoons, which is like the town's annual summer competition, and she thinks it would be perfect for her to like show up with a partner or like show up with somebody to like try and make her ex jealous. And so of course this kind of has like the fake dating kind of element to it that I also just really love. And dude, this was 5 stars for me. This was 5 stars. It was unexpected that it was 5 stars, but I love this. Like, do you see the amount of tabs that I put on this book? Like I put tabs in there for every time that I laughed. I could not believe how freaking funny this book was, especially on audio. I thought the audiobook was so freaking good because I followed along in the book, but then I also listened on audio, and the audiobook was so fucking funny. There were actually a few scenes where I laughed out loud, which like rarely ever happens to me with romance books. Like I was dying. I thought it was so cute. And like not only did these two have such great chemistry, but like I actually really cared for them as individuals. Like I loved both of their characters so fucking much. And I just really loved the small town vibes. Like I loved, it definitely reminded me of Schitt's Creek in that way, where it was like a really cute, cozy small town. And like some of the steamy scenes were actually so steamy that I was like blushing and shit. Like it was just so well written, so well done. Like this is everything that I love in a romance, because it definitely has the like romantic comedy elements, but then there is a good amount of drama and like scenes that'll like pull on your heartstrings. Like it has everything that I love in a romance book. I even thought the conflict towards the end, like it felt so real, you know, it felt so well done. It was so realistic. Like I just felt so much for these characters, and it was just so good. It was so freaking beautiful. I'm so glad that I read this. It was 5 stars. I can't even believe it. Alright, so that is a wrap on everything that I read in the month of May. I know it was a lot, but it was such a great reading month. I'm definitely very happy about the fact that I had 2 new 5-star favorite books of all time that I just absolutely loved. Thank you so much for watching. You'll have to let me know if you've read any of these books that I read this month. Please let me know what you think of them, and also let me know, how did the month of May go for you reading-wise? How many books did you read in the month of May, and what was your favorite book that you read this month? I would love to know, and thank you so much for watching as always, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye!